The first jolt came without warning, a violent shudder that rattled the cabin like a giant hand had grabbed the plane midair and shaken it in anger. Overhead, bins creaked, a child cried somewhere behind, and the lights flickered just long enough for fear to slip into every chest on board. In seat 8A, a single dad slept with his head tilted toward the window, unaware that in the next few minutes his past would collide with the fate of everyone on that flight. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet heroes who walk among us unseen, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be heard. He had fallen asleep the way exhausted parents do, not deeply but desperately, as if rest itself were a lifeline. His name was Daniel Harper, and the dark circles under his eyes told a story no one had asked to hear. 3 days earlier, he had worked a double shift repairing farm equipment, then spent the night packing lunches, folding clothes, and trying to calm his 6-year-old son's fear of thunderstorms. This flight was supposed to be simple, a short trip across the country to attend a mandatory training course for a new job that finally promised stability. He had chosen seat 8A because it was close to the front, hoping to get off quickly and make his connecting bus on time. He never imagined it would place him at the center of something far bigger. The plane lurched again, harder this time, and oxygen masks dropped like pale flowers from the ceiling. The hum of casual transformed into raw panic. Flight attendants moved quickly, but with faces too tense to hide the truth. The captain's voice came over the speakers, steady but strained, explaining that a sudden medical emergency in the cockpit had left the co-pilot unconscious, and severe turbulence had compromised some of the automated systems. They were maintaining altitude for now, but the situation was critical. Daniel stirred, his instincts snapping him awake before his mind fully caught up. Years ago, he used to wake to worse sounds than this. The metallic scream of alarms, the roar of engines pushed beyond their limits, the knowledge that one mistake could end lives. He blinked, heart racing, and took in the scene around him. White knuckles gripping armrests, whispered prayers, tears streaking down faces lit by flashing indicators. He felt the old tension coil in his muscles, familiar and unwelcome. The announcement that followed sliced through the cabin like a blade. The captain asked if there were any certified combat pilots on board, anyone with experience flying under emergency conditions, to please make themselves known to the crew immediately. A silence fell that felt heavier than the turbulence. People glanced at one another, hope and fear mingling in their eyes. Daniel stared straight ahead, his jaw tightening. He hadn't flown a military aircraft in nearly a decade. He told himself that part of his life was over. Buried along with the uniform he had folded away after his wife died, and his world collapsed into diapers, bills, and grief. He had promised himself that his son would never again have to wait at a window wondering if his father would come home. But memory is a stubborn thing. It doesn't ask permission before it rises. Daniel remembered the desert heat, the way the horizon shimmered like a lie. He remembered flying missions that never made the news, landing damaged aircraft on strips barely long enough to forgive error. He remembered being calm when others panicked, focused when everything screamed to fall apart. He also remembered the day he got the call that his wife had been killed by a drunk driver while picking up groceries, and how the sky had never looked the same after that. The plane dropped suddenly and screams tore through the cabin. A woman across the aisle clutched her chest, sobbing openly. Daniel thought of his son, asleep in his grandmother's house, clutching a worn stuffed dog that smelled faintly of engine oil because Daniel had once used it as a rag in a pinch. He thought of the promise he made at the small graveside that he would always come home. His hands trembled as he unclenched them. This wasn't his battlefield anymore, he told himself. He was just a tired father trying to survive. Someone else would stand up. Someone else would answer. Seconds stretched. No one moved. The turbulence worsened, tossing the aircraft like a leaf. A flight attendant stumbled but kept her footing, eyes scanning the cabin with growing urgency. The silence became unbearable, thick with the weight of what might happen next. Daniel exhaled slowly, the way he had been trained to do when fear threatened to steal control. He stood. It wasn't dramatic. No spotlight followed him. No music swelled. He simply rose from seat 8A, placed a steadying hand on the seat back in front of him, and nodded to the nearest flight attendant. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but firm, shaped by years of command and restraint. He identified himself, listed his qualifications, and offered what he could give. As he followed her toward the cockpit, the eyes of every passenger tracked him. Some whispered prayers. Others stared with something like awe. To Daniel, it felt unreal, like stepping back into a life he had tried so hard to leave behind. Inside the cockpit, the air was tense and heavy with alarms. The captain, pale and sweating, looked at Daniel with a mix of relief and disbelief. There was no time for questions beyond the essential. Daniel slid into the co-pilot seat, his hands moving over controls with muscle memory that surprised even him. The aircraft shuddered again, but this time he was ready. What followed was a blur of calculation and instinct. He adjusted systems, compensated for the damaged automation, and worked with the captain to stabilize the descent. The turbulence fought them every second, but Daniel had flown through worse with less. He focused not on the fear but on the task, narrowing the world down to speed, altitude, and the feel of the aircraft beneath him. As they descended, the city lights came into view, a fragile constellation waiting below. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought of all the nights he had tucked his son in and wondered if he was enough, if surviving was the same as living. In that moment, he understood that the parts of himself he had buried were not gone. They were simply waiting for a reason to matter again. The landing was hard but controlled, the tires screaming in protest before finally gripping the runway. When the plane slowed and came to a stop, there was a heartbeat of stunned silence, and then the cabin erupted. Applause thundered through the aircraft, mixed with tears, laughter, and the raw release of people who had stared death in the face and been spared. Daniel stayed seated for a moment, his hands resting on his thighs, shaking now that the adrenaline faded. He felt older than he had an hour ago, and strangely lighter too. The captain clasped his shoulder in gratitude, words unnecessary. As Daniel stepped back into the cabin, passengers reached out to touch his arm, to thank him, to tell him he was a hero. He nodded, offered small smiles, but inside he felt something deeper than pride. He felt healed in a way he hadn't known he needed. Back in seat 8A, he sat and closed his eyes. He imagined calling his son later, hearing the excitement in his voice when Daniel would tell him he was safe. Jose. Maybe one day he would tell him the whole story, not as a tale of danger, but as a lesson about courage and responsibility. If this story has touched your heart, if you felt that swell of hope and relief just now, please take a second to like the video, share it with someone you care about, and let us know in the comments. Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who need them. Before this video ends, we have a special request for you. Comment below with a single word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. As emergency crews surrounded the plane and passengers prepared to disembark, Daniel looked out the window one last time. Oh. The sky was calm now, painted with the soft colors of dawn. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. He wasn't just a survivor of his past anymore. He was a father who had faced fear and chosen to act not for glory, but because sometimes the world asks you to stand up when you least expect it. And when you do, you may just find that you were stronger all along. The airport terminal smelled of jet fuel and burnt rubber when the cabin doors finally opened. But to the passengers stepping out, it felt like the scent of life itself. People moved slowly down the aisle, some limping, some holding strangers' hands, all of them changed in small but permanent ways. Daniel stayed behind until the rush passed, his legs heavy as if gravity itself had doubled. The adrenaline that had carried him through the landing was gone now, replaced by a deep, bone-level exhaustion and a quiet tremor that refused to leave his hands. He watched from seat 8A as flight attendants hugged one another, their composure finally cracking now that the danger was over. When he stepped onto the tarmac, the morning air hit his face, cool and unreal. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft like guardians, lights flashing silently in the growing dawn. Paramedics checked him briefly, asking questions he answered automatically. He felt detached, as if the world had moved a few inches to the left and he hadn't caught up yet. Around him, passengers spoke in hushed, reverent tones, retelling the same moments again and again, as if repetition might make it all make sense. Some pointed toward him, others simply watched with gratitude in their eyes. Daniel kept his head down. He had never been comfortable with attention, not even when medals were pinned to his chest years ago. Inside the terminal, the chaos softened into something gentler. Phones came out, messages were sent, tears flowed freely now. Daniel found a quiet corner near a window overlooking the runway and finally allowed himself to sit. His body sagged, and with it came memories he had kept locked away. The night he told his son that his mother wasn't coming home. The way the boy had waited for weeks, convinced it was all a mistake. Daniel had survived that moment by shutting parts of himself down, by becoming efficient instead of emotional. Today had cracked that armor wide open. A representative from the airline approached him with paperwork and thanks, promises of follow-up and compensation he barely heard. What stayed with him instead was the weight of responsibility settling back into his chest, not as a burden this time, but as a reminder of who he was beneath the layers of grief and fatigue. He realized that walking away from his past hadn't erased it. It had only delayed its return. Hours later, when the terminal finally quieted and the sun climbed higher, Daniel stepped outside and borrowed a phone to make a call. His fingers hovered for a moment before dialing, his heart pounding harder than it had during the descent. When his son answered sleepy and confused, Daniel felt something inside him loosen. He told him he loved him, told him he would be home soon, told him everything was okay. He didn't explain why his voice shook. He didn't need to. The simple sound of his child's breathing on the other end was enough. As the day unfolded, news of the incident began to spread. Videos taken by passengers circulated online, though most showed little more than chaos and blurred motion. Daniel's name appeared in a few posts praised and speculated about, but he avoided looking. He had learned long ago that public attention was fleeting and often hollow. What mattered to him was quieter, more fragile. It was the knowledge that he had acted not because he wanted to be seen, but because he couldn't live with himself if he hadn't. That evening, as he finally boarded a later flight arranged by the airline, Daniel chose a seat near the back. He wanted anonymity, a chance to think. The cabin lights dimmed, and as the plane lifted smoothly into the sky, he felt a surprising calm. Flying no longer felt like a ghost reaching out to him. It felt like a part of himself he had reclaimed. He thought about the job training he was headed to, about the future he was trying to build one paycheck at a time. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine more than survival. He imagined being present, truly present, for his son. He imagined telling him one day not just about the danger, but about the choice, about how fear never really disappears and courage is deciding what matters more. If you've stayed with this story until now, if Daniel's journey has stirred something inside you, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and leave a comment. Your engagement helps these stories reach hearts that need them, and it means more than you realize. When the flight landed safely this time, there was no applause, no sirens, no headlines waiting. Daniel stepped off the plane with his bag slung over his shoulder and blended into the flow of ordinary life. And yet, he felt different, stronger, more whole. He understood now that second chances don't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes they arrive disguised as crisis, asking everything of you in a single moment. Before we end, we ask you one last thing. Please comment below with a single word that captures what this story left you feeling. Connection, hope, gratitude, courage. Your words help build a community where stories like this can live and breathe. As Daniel walked toward the exit, sunlight pouring through the glass walls ahead, he smiled to himself. He was still a single dad, still tired, still human. Whee! But he was also a man who had faced the sky when it shook and chosen to rise. And somewhere not far away, a little boy was waiting for him to come home, unaware that his father had just reminded an entire plane full of strangers what quiet heroism looks like.